On today's show, it appears Fred VanVleet is planning to be in Houston for a long time. Why that's the right move for the Rockets and so much more. It's all coming up on today's Locked On Rockets.
This is Mission Control, Houston.
Ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
What's up and welcome to another edition of Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. As always, I'm your host, Jackson Gatlin, native Houstonian and credentialed media member. I'm also the host of Locked On NBA Mondays. Be sure to follow along wherever you listen to your podcasts or on YouTube. Just search Locked On Rockets, where the best way that you can help our show is to listen every single day on a podcast platform of your choosing. Be sure to like and subscribe on YouTube. And while you're there, drop a comment. Just say go Rockets. Share your thoughts on what we talk about in the episode. All that good stuff. Now, today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off of your first purchase. And as always, thank you so much for making Locked On Rockets part of your day every single day, whether it's on your way to work, on your lunch break, in the gym. Thank you so much for being one of our everydayers. So shout out to a couple everydayers here at the top of the program. Lance and Reggie, met you guys over at Rockets Open Practice the other day. It was fun talking a little bit of basketball with you guys. I appreciate the support. Thank you guys for saying what's up. And to anybody, if you see me out and about, if you see me at a Rockets game or just at a restaurant, just say what's up. Like, I saw a couple people who were like, I saw you at Open Practice and I didn't want to say anything. I didn't want to impose. I'm just a dude. Just come say hi. It's totally fine. All right, so for today's show, we're going to take a look at some comments from Fred VanVleet by way of the Houston Chronicles' Jonathan Feigen. Some very strong comments about what he believes his future to be with this Houston Rockets team and why it feels like Fred is going to be a long-term fit for the Rockets and why that's probably the right course of action for this organization to take. We'll also take a look ahead at Rockets-Pelicans, some takeaways, or not takeaways, I apologize, some expectations for that matchup, things to look out for, all that good stuff. So let's start with the Fred stuff here from the top, because Jonathan Feigen of the Houston Chronicle published an article the other day that had some really, really strong commentary direct from Fred VanVleet himself about being a Houston Rocket, about being a part of the Rockets organization. And I thought these lines really stood out. So there's two specific lines. First, Fred said, I'm a Houstonian. Just getting situated in my first summer at Houston, which was an experience with the tornado and the hurricane and all the weather things we had, but just getting settled, getting my family settled, it's been a blessing to be in a place you call home. So he's already embracing Houston top to bottom, right? Calling himself a Houstonian, saying the city is home. But it's this next line that paints kind of the bigger picture here. I didn't come here to be a rental, VanVleet said. I didn't come here to be a free agent again. I came here for a long-term home. I've loved my time here so far. I think I have a good understanding with management and the coaches about what the future looks like with this team. That is really, really confident and really strong for a player to say. And obviously, look, there have been questions about, okay, what direction are the Rockets going to go in once Fred's contract comes to an end? He signed a 3-year deal with the Rockets. That third year is a team option. And again, the Rockets gave him a max deal, right? They paid him the most that they could pay him of any other team in the association. But it kind of makes a lot of sense if you look at it from kind of a wink, wink, nudge, nudge kind of standpoint. The Rockets may be overpaid right out of the gate to secure Fred VanVleet to get him away from Toronto. And now he wants to be able to find himself situated and wants a long-term spot with this Rockets organization. We've talked a lot about what that would look like, contractually. The Rockets declined the final year of his team option, and then they sign him for a longer-term deal at less average annual value. We're going to get more into the financials and the logistics of it here in just a minute, but let's focus on what it actually means if the Rockets want to keep Fred VanVleet on this team long-term. First and foremost, I know there are a lot of Rockets fans that are incredibly excited about Reed Shepherd, that still have incredibly high hopes about Amin Thompson as at least one of the two starting backcourt pieces of the future, whether it's as the true blue point guard or more of a point forward or what have you. And Fred, to some fans, kind of presents an obstacle in that regard. I think some fans look at Fred as like, oh man, he's the vet. He's eating up minutes from these young guys. I think this team is hopefully this season not as dependent on Fred VanVleet as they were last year, but it's still clear as day. This team needs Fred VanVleet. They are not ready to graduate from having Fred VanVleet be the guy running the show. They need that steady hand. They need that veteran presence. They need the leadership. They need everything that he provides. They need the calming influence that he gives them on the floor, right? He is the only player on this Rockets roster who has been an all-star before. Like, he's the only player who, I tell you, I can't say he's the only player with championship experience because Jeff Green exists. But he's one of the only players with true blue, deep playoff run experience, right? All the intangibles that Fred brings to the court, and the stuff that you can, all the measurables too. He is an indisposable part of this Rockets team. And I love the idea of the Rockets wanting to keep him long term, as long as the only caveat here is as long as he's open to his role changing over time, right? I'm not saying the Rockets should sign him to a 3-year, 4-year long deal after this one and, decline it, whatever, and let him be the starting point guard for the next 3-4 seasons. I'm saying sign him to the new deal and let him adapt his role as necessary, right? Reed Sheppard is probably the heir apparent, future starting point guard of this Rockets team. That feels like a pretty safe bet to make at this point. Now, whether that happens a season from now, whether that happens 2 or 3 seasons from now, we don't know. But having a stable vet like Fred who can run the point, who can be your starting point guard and provide everything he provides, and then when the time comes, when Reed Sheppard is ready to take those reins, be able to swap those two out, and then Fred just goes to a backup role and Reed becomes the true blue starter, that seems like a really easy, seamless switch to be able to make happen where, yeah, maybe Fred starts getting a little bit older, or maybe Reed is ready sooner than we expected. Cool. Then Fred becomes the sixth man leader, point guard, extension of the coaching staff off the bench, right? There's no issue with that. But you hear about how Fred talks about Houston, how he talks about why he came to Houston and the role that he envisions with the coaching staff and everything. It sounds like Fred is going to be here for a very, very long time. And to me, that's the right move, right? You don't want to try and, I don't want to say rip the Band-Aid off too quickly. You don't want to take the training wheels off too quickly. And I don't even think it's looking at Fred as necessarily training wheels throughout this entire, period of time, or I don't think it would be, again, they're over relying on Fred for the next 2, 3, 4 seasons, whatever it may be. It's just about having a good, strong, capable player who has embraced his role, who has embraced the mentorship role that he's been given. And if Fred is, one of the pieces that helps usher in this new age of Rockets basketball, we already saw him leading the team, helping the team to a 41-41 season last year. The Rockets have high hopes for playoff expectations this year. Why boot him out the door after 2 years, right? You can re-sign him on a friendlier team deal. Team-friendly deal, whatever. You can re-sign him on a cheaper contract for more years, and then you can adjust his role as necessary down the line. It seems like that's probably the direction that the Houston Rockets are going to go. Seems like Fred is going to be a long-term piece here in Houston. But what does that look like logistically? What does that look like financially? How does that impact what the Rockets are going to be able to do next offseason and in the coming years if they do decide they want to keep Fred VanVleet long-term? We're going to tackle that, and we're going to get to Rockets-Pelicans here in just one moment. First, today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Look, Game Time is the best ticketing experience on the marketplace right now. They've got so many different features that make it such a seamless experience. Right now, their Game Time Picks, which makes curation even easier to save more on sports, concerts, comedy, theater events, whatever you're trying to attend. They've got their Game Time ticket covers, their lowest price guarantee, views from your seat, so you know exactly what to expect when you get to your venue. My personal favorite, though, is their all-in pricing feature. You toggle this feature on as soon as you just download the Game Time app, toggle the feature on, and they're fully transparent from start to finish with your price. I don't know about you, my least favorite thing when I'm buying tickets to whatever kind of event is you get to the very end and then they hit you with the digital handling fee and the service charges and the convenience fees, and you wind up paying more in fees than you do for your actual tickets. That doesn't happen with Game Time. They're fully transparent from start to finish with their all-in pricing feature. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time Picks. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off of your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONNBA. That's LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? It's game time. And continuing on here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast, home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. Now, what does it mean logistically, financially, right, if the Rockets do want to keep Fred VanVleet long term? Actually, first off, before I get into the financials really quickly, I wanted to add one more point to kind of the type of leader that Fred is. I wanted to talk about this in segment one, and I had it in my notes and just kind of glossed over it, didn't get to it. But the other day at practice, the Rockets practice had finished. The practice was over. They were getting ready to do their free throw shooting drills, which is always the final thing they do in practice. They split up across the 4 different baskets. They do their free throw shooting. And as the players are all doing their free throw routines to close out practice, that's when we get media availability with coach, with whatever players we're getting that day, all that good stuff. In the midst of them doing their free throw shooting practice, as we were waiting on coach to come over and talk to us, Fred went and got Steven Adams' attention and brought him over to his side of the court. And then he went and got Reed, and he went and got Alperen Sengun. And with the 4 of them, and it wound up growing, and a few other players came over for the drill, but that was the 4 that Fred had gathered originally. He then started an impromptu pick and roll drill post-practice, completely spearheaded by Fred. The coaches weren't involved in this. This wasn't like Ime told Fred, hey, go do this. And practice was over. And Fred was like, hey, I really want to work on this with you guys. And so then we saw Fred, Steven Adams, Alperen Sengun, Reed Sheppard, and a couple other guys, Jalen and Men, got involved as well. And they were running some pick and roll drills, right? With Steven Adams kind of working on the screening that he used in Memphis to open up Ja Morant, right? There were different things, and you could tell Fred and Steven were coaching up the guards and the bigs on how to make this work to their advantage. Steven Adams was over there like explaining like screening angles and stuff and timing of it all, and Fred was walking guys through on like, okay, well, if the defender does this and cut back this way, like it was really impressive to see Fred and his leadership in full effect for this young Rockets squad. And then after he had wrapped up these drills, he then went and took Reed specifically and went and did a bunch of one-on-one drills with Reed Sheppard, working on ball handling, working on navigating screens, working on pulling up for jumpers, all sorts of stuff that he worked on with Reed. And then after all that was said and done, Reed Sheppard, who has one of the most extensive, shooting regimens on the team, went through his entire closing routine, which is to hit a billion different shots from all over the floor, all from different three-point range, mid-range, all these different spots that he works through on the court. And of course, Reed was the guy that we were supposed to talk to that day. So we got to sit there and see all of it before we got kicked out of practice. And Reed was literally the last guy in the gym. Like one thing that I think a lot of people do, and I'll get back to the Fred side of the conversation here in a second, but now we're gassing up Reed Sheppard. One thing that a lot of people are like, oh my God, Reed Sheppard is Steph Curry, reincarnated and everything. I'll be honest, I see a lot more Chris Paul and a lot more like D Book in Reed's game. Obviously, he's got the 3-point shooting, he's got the range like Steph Curry. But the thing that he does have that is so similar to Steph Curry is the work ethic. Like the work ethic, I mean, Steph will spend apparently hours in the gym, after practice, whatever, just constantly getting up shot after shot after shot. You don't become the greatest shooter of all time without absolute dedication to your craft. And that's exactly the type of mentality that Reed Sheppard has. There's a reason he's such an elite shooter already at such a young age. There's a reason that he can look at, okay, he missed 2 or 3 shots in a row, and then he can look over at the NOAA board, the shot tracker, immediately clock what he's doing wrong, and then go back to shooting and not miss the next 10 shots in a row. The Rockets really got a special kid in Reed Sheppard. And again, having a vet like Fred VanVleet to cultivate and nurture and grow that talent is so monumentally important to the future success of this team. So I wanted to highlight that note really quickly about Fred, about his leadership, about what he brings to this team, and why it feels like keeping him around long term would be the right move for the organization. But what would that look like, right? What would the financials look like if they kept Fred long term? So right now, right, the Rockets can decline his final option, and then they'd have to re-sign him. Now, here's the thing: is logistically, if the Rockets wanted to re-sign Fred on a lower average annual value, we'll say something like $30 or $35 million a year across probably like 4 years, something like that. So like 4 years, 120 or 4 years, 140, which honestly, with the way that the CBA is rising and everything, that's a pretty team-friendly deal for a guy like Fred VanVleet, especially if he's going to continue to be your starter, if he's going to continue to be a really big part of, kind of developing and growing these young guys. Now, what that means for the Rockets and what that means specifically for next offseason, a lot of eyes have been focused on next offseason for the Rockets. That's why there's been so much discussion about what the Rockets are ultimately going to do with the contracts of Jalen Green and Alperen Sengun. Because right now, if the Rockets just let those guys roll into restricted free agency, then Jalen Green's going to have a cap hold, a pretty sizable cap hold of around like $30-something million. And then Alperen Sengun's cap hold is noticeably or significantly a lot smaller. And there's about between what the Rockets could sign Sengun for right now, as a quick refresher, and what his cap hold is next offseason, it's about a $20 million difference if they wanted to max him right now. And that's why there's this whole discussion about, it's the smart move for the Rockets to wait. They have all that financial flexibility down the line, all that stuff. Let's take the Fred VanVleet kind of angle of things, the long-term angle for Fred VanVleet, and also package it with the recent reporting and the news that there has been some kind of movement on the Alperen Sengun contract front. And I think these two things are directly related, because if the Rockets envision themselves keeping Fred VanVleet long-term, if they're going to dip into their cap space next offseason in order to re-sign Fred VanVleet to a long-term deal but at lower average annual value, that immediately cuts into any of their financial flexibility, any of their ability to go out and sign a marquee free agent or to, trade for a star player and just absorb them directly into cap space, all these things, right? Again, the Rockets were projected to be able to open up as much as 2 max contracts worth of cap space next offseason if they let all their expiring deals fall off the books, if they let Fred VanVleet walk, all these different things, right? But if you are going to hold on to Fred VanVleet, right, if you're going to hold on to him, if you're going to re-sign him at $35 million a year, that's going to eat into a huge chunk of that available cap space. And on top of that, if there's not a marquee free agent, if there's not a name or a pair of names that you're planning to pursue that you're going to utilize that cap space on, then maybe that's why we're hearing some renewed movement on the Alperen Sengun contract extension front, because you could make Sengun wait and you could have that extra $20 million in cap space, but if you're not going to do anything with it, then you could maybe get that peace of mind for Alperen Sengun ahead of the season, as well as what it sounds like is potentially maybe getting him on less than a maximum rookie extension, because I'm sure Alperen Sengun's camp wants to get the deal done. They want the security of it, all of that, in case of another injury or what have you, all these different reasons for wanting to get the deal done sooner, right? So if Sengun's camp is also willing to sacrifice a little bit of that long-term money, and you couple that with the fact that the Rockets are going to potentially just be bringing back Fred VanVleet anyways next summer, therefore cutting even further into their available cap room, then it just makes a lot of sense to just go ahead and knock out the Sengun deal now, rather than all this ultimate posturing of like, financial flexibility, and we're going to have all this cap room, and then we're ultimately not going to do anything with it. Like, I don't know. I mean, I get wanting to have the financial flexibility. I get wanting to have the optionality to chase a star player or to sign somebody outright in free agency. But unless you have a concrete plan of who you want to pursue, like the Rockets knew for a very long time that they had their eyes on Fred VanVleet, Dylan Brooks, and ultimately Brook Lopez, the third of those names ultimately not working out, choosing to stay in Milwaukee instead. They had their eyes on those 3 players for a very, very long time heading into that offseason where they had all that cap space to spend, right? I don't think there's a name out there that I've heard of, at least, that the Rockets are attached to or as heavily rumored to be pursuing next offseason. And again, a big part of that probably comes down to there's just not a name out there that they think fits their timeline. There's not a name out there that they would want to pursue with a max deal. And so ultimately, you can just take care of the pieces that you do have financially, Alperen Sengun, potentially Jalen Green, bringing Fred VanVleet back, all that stuff. And then you're also not locking yourself into a big, massive contract when down the line, you're potentially still looking at having to pay Jabari and Tari, Amin and Cam, Reed Shepherd much further down the line. Like, these are all financial considerations that the Rockets are ultimately going to have to make. But It sounds like all signs are pointing to Fred VanVleet being a long-term fixture of the Houston Rockets organization. It sounds like he's embraced his role with the Houston Rockets, and it sounds like part of the original pitch for Fred coming to Houston was, hey, you're not just going to be a 2-year rental. We're not just going to kick you to the curb after your 2 years and send you to the very next team that wants to pay you. We want you here in Houston long-term. Maybe Reed Sheppard changes the calculus on that, or maybe it doesn't. Maybe they're willing to kind of, I don't want to say slow play the development of Reed, but again, if Fred is willing to adapt and change his role over time, then I don't see any reason why the Rockets can't re-sign Fred VanVleet this upcoming offseason. And then whenever Reed is ready to take the reins from him, clean swap, Fred goes to the bench, Reed takes the starting role, and everybody's happy. I'm curious your thoughts on the Rockets and their possibility of keeping Fred VanVleet long-term, keeping him past this upcoming season. What would you be comfortable with the Rockets paying him as a contract? Would you be okay with $35 million a year? What about $30 million a year? $25 a year? Let me know in the YouTube comments. Give me all your thoughts on that discussion. Coming up, Rockets-Pelicans, a quick preview, what to expect from the first home preseason game for your Houston Rockets. We're going to get there in just one moment. First, today's episode was brought to you by FanDuel. Look, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. When you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the exact same page where you place your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. Head on over to FanDuel.com. Take a look at the different season leaders, division winners, conference winners, season awards, all that good stuff, or just the outright favorites to win the Super Bowl. Right now, the Chiefs plus 500, the 49ers plus 650, the Ravens plus 750, the Detroit Lions plus 950, the Bills at plus 1,000, and your Houston Texans plus 1,100 to win it all this season. So for all those odds and so much more, head on over to FanDuel.com. And final segment here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. Okay, quick housekeeping note here before getting to Rockets-Pelicans. The Rockets have waived Thon Maker and Marquise Noel. Again, these guys were just signed to training camp deals to pick up their G League rights, and those guys are going to spend all their time down with the Vipers. NBA teams do this every season. You see NBA teams signing a bunch of players and then releasing them right away. The Rockets happened to sign these two guys and just had them stick around for training camp and for scrimmages and all those different purposes. They weren't going to make the roster. They weren't going to have that 15th slot on the roster. It was to get them to go down to the Vipers. So those guys have been waived. Now on to Rockets-Pelicans here really quickly. Quick update, roster update for both teams. For the Rockets, no Tari, Eason, and no Jock Landale against the Pelicans. So Ime Udoka spoke about this at practice and basically said, look, it's for Tari Eason, it's part of his injury maintenance. They're being cautious with him. They're taking it carefully. I would not read too much into this. From everything that I've heard, kind of both from coach and also from behind the scenes, Tari's healthy. He's doing great physically. The Rockets are just being cautious. That's all it is. They don't want to overwork him. They don't want to risk re-aggravating anything, but as all signs are pointing to the fact that Tari is healthy at this point, and that's a great thing. For Jock Landale, it's just continued rest from his long offseason playing in the Olympics. That's basically all it is. And he's also one of the guys, coming off of last season, his ankle injury, everything. Just kind of some maintenance there for Jock Landale, but there's nothing wrong with those two guys. They're not hurt. They're just resting. If this was an important, regular season game or an NBA Cup game or whatever, they'd both be playing if the Rockets needed them to suit up. That's kind of the situation there. Now, on the other side of the aisle for the Pelicans, no Brandon Ingram and no Trey Murphy. Brandon Ingram is out for an undisclosed reason in the final preseason game. And then Trey Murphy has been out with the right hamstring injury since a little bit earlier this month, about a week or two ago. And so he's going to be reevaluated in a few weeks. So that could play into the Rockets' favor, both now here in preseason and also a little bit later on in the regular season. But look, I think Pelicans are one of the teams that the Rockets are going to have to outplay potentially in order to secure themselves a play-in spot. I think the Pelicans are one of the teams that could see themselves plummet a little bit in the standings the fact that they still don't have a starting caliber center on the roster. I mean, they've got Rockets legend Daniel Tice that they've been rolling out at the 5. Who knows what their actual like regular season rotation is ultimately going to look like. It's been interesting seeing what they've been rolling out. We haven't gotten like a full picture yet of what the Pelicans roster is going to look like. There were some rumors that they might just roll out, like, I guess technically Zion at the 5 in the regular season, and have a starting lineup without Daniel Tice in it. You know, Herb Jones, Zion, CJ McCollum, DeJounte Murray, and then Brandon Ingram, and that could possibly be their 5. I don't know. I will say, one of the things I'm very curious to see here in this preseason game is how do the Rockets hold Zion Williamson? He's looked really good through a couple preseason games. He looked really dominant in the Pelicans' first preseason game. He only played about 17 minutes in the second one. So what are they able to do defensively to contain Zion ultimately? Because he is going to be an absolute force to deal with. And we know that last year, the Rockets did a great job containing Zion. Remember the in-season tournament game where Jeff Green like put the clamps on Zion? Who are the Rockets going to lean on as Zion's primary defender? Is it going to go to Dillon Brooks, or is it going to go to Jabari, or are they going to potentially allow Alperen Sengun some time checking Zion, right? Like, you know, Zion's not a shooter from the perimeter, and, you know, he does all his damage on the interior. Sengun might be the only guy strong enough to body Zion in the Houston Rockets starting lineup. So I'm very curious to see what kind of defensive scheme they roll out against Zion in this game. And then on the offensive end, you know, the last Rockets preseason game against the OKC Thunder left a pretty sour taste in my mouth with how things looked offensively. The Rockets, again, some of that, you got to give a hat tip to the Thunder. A lot of that came from just the Thunder's absolutely smothering defense, forcing the Rockets into a lot of really poor isolation play, and they weren't hitting shots, and it was just a really ugly all-around game for the most part. I want to see them not get bullied on that side of the floor, right? The Pelicans are nowhere near the defensive juggernaut that the Thunder are. So let's see if we can get a better picture as to what the Rockets offense is actually going to look like this season. This will also be the first game where we see the Rockets' true blue starting 5 in action, right? It'll be Fred VanVleet, Jalen Green, Dillon Brooks, Jabari Smith Jr., and Alperen Sengun. We didn't get that in game 1 against the Jazz. We didn't get that in game 2 against the Thunder because we were missing Dillon Brooks in game 1, and we were missing Fred VanVleet, who is a very significant piece of what the Rockets do in game 2. So how much better do things look? We know that from last season, the Rockets' 5-man starting lineup, when they were on the court together, they actually played really, really well together. So how does that look in this preseason game? How do the Pelicans ultimately defend stuff? Do we see more of, you know, Sengun being involved in the offense again? I would like to believe that one of the reasons we haven't seen a ton of that so far to this point is Ime's just been experimenting, trying to let other guys, you know, get involved a little bit more because he kind of knows what he has with Sengun in the starting lineup. But I definitely want to see the Rockets get back to some of their bread and butter offensively. And one other thing that I'm looking for here is I would like to see some minutes between Reed and Alperen Sengun. I feel like we haven't gotten a ton of that yet through a couple preseason games. It's felt like Reed Shepherd has played primarily with a lot of the bench guys ultimately. I would love to see what we have there. And then unfortunately with Tari Eason out of the rotation, we won't get a true glimpse at what the Rockets defense or what the Rockets rotation is going to look like this season yet, because again, Tari Eason projects to be a pretty big part of the Rockets rotation, so you can't exactly just, you know, you're not going to plug and play like Jayshawn Tate for all of the Tari Eason minutes. I fully expect guys like Amin Thompson and Cam Whitmore are going to get extra burn in place of Tari Eason being absent for this game, but we will get a closer look at what, you know, we can maybe expect the rotation to look like a little bit. The one key thing that I'm paying attention to is, are Fred VanVleet and Alperen Sengun's minutes going to be mirrored again this season? And then 2, where does Jalen Green fit in? Because last season, Ime tried deploying Jalen in so many different ways, right? He tried leaving him in with the starters for extended period and letting, you know, Sengun and Fred run the bench unit. Then he tried running him with the bench unit exclusively, which is like the lineup where Jalen Green is supposed to feast and get all his shots. I do think that we're going to probably get the version of Jalen Green gets the early substitution out in place of, Cam Whitmore or Reed or whoever. And then Jalen comes back in late first quarter, early second quarter, and he's basically running with the bench unit plus Steven Adams, right? That's a ton of athletes plus Steven Adams to be able to run up and down the court. Plus Steven Adams is a fantastic outlet passer, and having Steven Adams to screen for Jalen Green will open up his game considerably. We saw that a lot in game 1 against the Utah Jazz. I fully expect that to be the case going into the regular season. At least that's what I'm expecting Ime Udoka to do with some of the lineups up and down the roster. With that, I'm curious what your thoughts are. What are you hoping to see out of this Rockets-Pelicans game? What are your expectations? I think it should be an easy win. The Rockets are playing at relatively full strength minus Tari Eason. The Pelicans are missing 2 starting caliber players, even though Trey Murphy is not technically a starter for them yet. They're missing 2 starting caliber players, and they just don't have... The Pelicans are going to have zero answer for Alperen Sengun. Like, let the Pelicans try to stop Sengun. They're going to be in deep foul trouble, guaranteed. Like, who's going to hold Sengun in this game? It's not going to be JRE. It's not going to be Jeremiah Robinson-Earl. It's not going to be Daniel Tice. It's not going to be Missy. They don't have anybody that can check Alperen Sengun. So this should be a game where if the Rockets don't ignore him and heavily involve him in the offense, then Sengun should feast against this Pelicans squad. On that note, give me your thoughts about the Fred VanVleet stuff from the first couple segments. Give me your thoughts on Rockets-Pelicans. Let me know in the YouTube comments. But as always, thank you so much for checking out the show. If you haven't done so yet, please consider subscribing wherever you listen to your podcasts or on YouTube. Search Locked On Rockets, like, comment, subscribe, listen every single day on a podcast platform of your choosing, all that good stuff. But as always, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. And we look forward to having you back right here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball.